that surpasses, that outpaces our sin. We are sinners. We recognize we are saints only in that we have been saved by your grace, not by any merit or deservingness on our part. I pray that as we study these chapters or really survey through them, that you give us a sense of understanding the ebbs and flows of this story and how some of the truths of this story apply in our lives as well. And we thank you for working in our hearts to give us insight and wisdom to appreciate these chapters in your word. I pray that you bless our time together. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Good. We're going to do something amazing. We're going to try to get through Genesis 42 and at least through 44, and maybe even into 45. We'll see how fast I can talk. Again, this is the kind of thing. I want you to think of this as a tour. If you were to all get in our van, yes, all of you in our van, and we're going to tour downtown Alpharetta. We might stop a couple of places. But we'll pass one place and you say, hey, that's a cool place, I want to go there. I said, oh, we're on a tour, we're going to go through the tour. You can always go back there if you want to on your own time. Well, same thing with a passage like this. We're going to go through really just to get the overview. You're familiar with this story to a certain extent, but we kind of want to get the highs and the lows of the story. And if there's something you see that you want to go back and study on your own, you're absolutely free to do so. And by the way, I've loved several of you who sent me some really great insights about some of these things that we've talked about in Joseph's life. And I really love that. That's great. It's great to see you all thinking about some of these things. So we'll start in Genesis 42, and you'll see your handout in the, or you can see the outline on your handout: an emotional encounter, a sibling stratagem, and then in verse chapter 45, if we get to it this week, a rich reveal. I think that these chapters are some of the most emotional in the Bible, if for no other reason than how much they demonstrate the characters themselves stopping and having to turn aside and weep and cry, and how emotional this is for Joseph and for his brothers. And I think it brings up some great things for us to think about. How do we handle the emotional stress that life puts on us? Growing up in 70s and 80s Northern fundamentalist Christianity, emotions were really kind of downplayed. Well, you can have a little bit of fun, but don't have too much fun, and these kinds of things. You have to really keep your emotions in check. Almost give you a sense that emotions were bad. Well, they're certainly not bad. They certainly do need to be kept in check. How do we deal with the severe emotions in life from God's Word? And I don't know if some brands of Christianity have really helped us out with that. How will God's Word help us out with that? How do we deal with the sometimes sharp and uncomfortable feelings and situations we finally find ourselves in? So that's the emotions of this is one thing. The next level up, I think, is remember these are the brothers that are going to be the 12 tribes of Israel. What do you think? How do you think this is going to go well, based on what we know about these brothers already from chapters 37 through 38? These are the guys that sold Joseph into slavery. 38 is one about Judah, where we don't walk away from chapter 38 very impressed with Judah. Are you kidding me that God is going to use these guys to be the progenitors of a nation he's going to have he has a unique covenant with? Do we see any change in these gentlemen over the course of these several chapters and over several decades? That's what we're looking for, some change. What about us? Has there been some change in us? Have we kind of flatlined spiritually, or are we growing? Are we maturing in our faith? And then I think there's an even broader issue here, that one of the questions that one of the characters at one point says, how do we resolve the desperate plea of humanity? One character says, how can we justify ourselves? It almost sounds Pauline when Judah says this in front of Joseph. Now, he's talking about a very specific instance, a very specific situation, but it really kind of points to the bigger issue of Scripture. How can we justify ourselves? Or once we realize we cannot justify ourselves, what are our options for deliverance and salvation? A lot of these kinds of factors come into these chapters. We'll try to summarize them and point to some of these issues. Let's start in chapter 42. with an emotional encounter. And what I want to do actually before that is just highlight a couple things from the end of chapter 41. So again, just a little bit of summary. Chapter 40, Joseph interprets the dreams of the baker and the cupbearer, both of which go perfectly, except that one of them forgets Joseph and he's in prison for 2 more years. Pharaoh has some unsettling dreams in chapter 41, and no one's going to help him with these. And the one guy says, "Oh, I remember an interpreter that I ran into in prison when you sent me in prison." But anyway, let's get him, and he comes. And of course, this is Joseph. This is our man Joseph, and he comes before the Pharaoh, interprets his dreams, and says Egypt is going to have 7 years of tremendous plenty, and then 7 years of tremendous famine. Severe famine that's going to affect a lot of the areas. And then he offers, we talked about this last week, he volunteers, you know what you need to do? You need to find a really insightful guy and put him in charge of this thing for the next 14 years. I don't know who that would be. And Pharaoh says, you're our guy, you're going to do it. By the time we get, for all that Joseph has been through ups and downs, by the time we get to the end of chapter 41, he's in a good situation. He's been given a new name. He has been given a family. We have to see the birth of his sons. This is again chapter 40, verse 50. Chapter 41, verse 50. He's been given a family. He's got 2 sons. He's been given a new name. He is now the Egyptian grain czar. I don't know if they had czars, a drug czar, and a road czar. He's the grain czar of Egypt now, second only to Pharaoh himself. There is a lot of emphasis toward the end of this passage of chapter 41 about the extent, the severity of this famine. In fact, if you look, it says in verse 54 that the famine was in all the lands. We see this again in verse 56, spread over the face of the earth. Twice in verse 57, the people of all the earth came to Egypt. The famine was so severe in all the earth. By the way, this is how God is going to get Joseph face to face with his brothers again. And when you think about, why is God allowing this terrible thing to happen in my life? He has a plan to get you face to face with someone that he wants you to interact with, or you somewhere where you need to be in order so that he can do a greater and a broader work in your life. Joseph is really in a great place. I love verse, let me see where it is. Verse 55, again, chapter 41, 55. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. He'll take whatever he says to you. You shall do." So he's got a tremendous amount of power, tremendous amount of wealth, and things are going really well for him. Not so much for Jacob and his brothers, and that's the irony of what they did. They did something terrible to him so that they would be in a better situation. They come to find out that they are in a very bad situation themselves. Let me just read chapter 42, verses 1 through 6. It says, "Now Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, and Jacob said to his sons, 'Why are you staring at one another?' He said, 'Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from that place, so that we may live and not die.' Then 10 brothers of Joseph went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, 'I'm afraid that harm may befall him.' So the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those who were coming, for the famine was in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the ruler over the land," verse 6. "He was the one who sold to all the people of the land, and Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground." Verse 1, now Jacob. Oh yeah. It seems like Joseph had now outpaced his past. And now his past is going to come back and interact with him again. And we're reminded, Joseph's in a great situation. Jacob and the boys, not so much. Things are not going very well for them at all. It's funny, I actually read a commentary that kind of reiterated what I felt. I feel like Jacob's being a little snarky here. Hey guys, I don't mean to interrupt your staring contest. I know how beneficial that is. That's really helping us out a lot. But maybe why don't you guys ski-daddle on down to Egypt there and get us some food. And then in very dad-like fashion at the end of verse 2, he says, now let me just reiterate, we have 2 options here. We can stay here and starve, That sounds like a lot of fun. Or you guys could go down there and get us some food, and then we'll be okay. They're like, okay, Dad, fine, we'll go. And the 10 brothers, they went down. We get it. Now, that's kind of funny because he's a little more humble when he approaches them again in the chapter and says, wow, we're still in a bad situation. We need you to go down and get us some food. So anyway, they go. He gives them this life or death choice. 10 of them go. Benjamin stays behind. And then suddenly, if you recall how startling it must have been for Joseph in prison to suddenly be face to face with Pharaoh with very little warning. Now suddenly he's face to face for the first time in a long time with his brothers. I tried to estimate what the time frame is here. Remember, he was 17 when he was sold into slavery. The text, actually in chapter 41, I don't remember where it was, but it says he was 30 when he was face to face with Pharaoh. So that's 13 years right there. And then we have 7 years have gone by, 7 years of plenty, and now we're into the 7 years of famine, so maybe 2 or 3 years. By my calculation, that's about 22 or 23 years has gone by. A long time, a lot of changes. Now, he looks very different. They don't even know he's alive. He looks at them and he knows who they are instantly. And I've got to imagine there's a lot of feelings there, especially when they come before him and they bow down to him. You're like, wow, are you kidding me? Imagine going home that evening. Honey, how was your day? Oh, what a day I had. I mean, this is the day I never thought would happen. I mean, this is literally a day I dreamed about, what happened today. It was a pretty crazy day. I'm going to summarize and kind of move forward here. He recognizes them. Verse 8 mentions that, and he remembers his dreams. So again, his dreams are foremost on his mind. The baker and the cupbearers, their dreams came true. Pharaoh's dream is coming true. His dream has not yet come true until this moment, at least in part. And he remembers his dreams, and he remembers surely God giving him these dreams and God being faithful to him in these dreams, despite all the things, the ups and downs he's gone through. An interesting question. Why doesn't he just say, hey, it's me, it's Joe. This is great. It's great you guys are down here. He doesn't do that. He doesn't do that for 3 chapters. He's going to get into some like I said in the next for the next chapter, stratagems, some deception, some ploys, and I think he's trying to teach them a lesson and maybe give them a little sense of what he himself has been through. So he immediately puts them on the defensive in verse 9. You are spies. You have come down to look for undefended parts of our land. I bet they weren't expecting them. By the way, isn't that funny? Because what was he do? He kind of spied on them and ratted them out a little bit, didn't he? And now he accuses them of being spies. How do you like being falsely accused? I bet they probably didn't dig that too much. They claim that they are, you keep reading down verse 10, and they said to him, no, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies. Honest men. And now he's going to engage in a very elaborate experimentation to test that hypothesis, whether they are honest men. Now, let's be honest, they weren't honest men. But you know what? We're going to see that they have changed. We're going to see some change in them. In fact, what they say in verse 13, your servants, 12 brothers in all, sons of one man in Canaan. Behold, the youngest is with our father today. One is no longer alive, not knowing that one is standing right in front of them. Well, so far the story checks out. So far the honesty is checking out. But he's not through with them here. He's not sure about this. You know what? God tests people. But here he will use Joseph to test these 10 men, and also Benjamin and also Jacob, as the story goes. These are people who will be the progenitors of the nation of Israel. They are going to be tested. And you think, I don't think Joseph has the right to put them through this. Well, God's sovereign hand, as he will point out later, God's sovereign hand is behind these testings, as God is going to test these men to see if they have grown in their faith since the indiscretions of their youth. So then let's just read verses 14 through 18. He says, and Joseph said to them, it is as I said to you, you are spies. By this you will be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you that he may get your brother while you remain confined, that your words may be tested whether there is truth in you. But if not, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. So he put them all together in prison for 3 days. And he slept really well that night. I added that, but I just got to mention, oh, what a day I had. I got to imagine. Joseph, so again, he's going to put them through some things he's been through. He's been in prison. He's been falsely accused. This is part of the testing process. Again, I think it comes from Joseph. I don't get that Joseph is being vindictive here. I get more, especially from what we've seen throughout, that God is using Joseph as a means to test these fellows and how they have grown spiritually. One other thing that I think is really important, he says, hey, there's another brother. You guys aren't going until I see him. We'll let one of you go to fetch him, bring him back. That is how I'm going to test whether or not you are spies or honest people. How they steward Benjamin really becomes the litmus test and the focus and the tension of this story. Because Joseph is thinking, you guys didn't steward me all that well. You guys didn't, 17 and you sell me into slavery. That is not cool. How are they going to do with Benjamin? And Benjamin becomes the arena on which their change, their maturity will be demonstrated, and their faithfulness would be demonstrated. So after 3 days, he lets them out. He relents, quote unquote, and insists that one of them stay. And I'm going to fast forward here a little bit, if I may. One of them is going to stay. The rest have to go and fetch the other brother. We're given an interesting detail in verse 21. In fact, I'll read parts of 21 through 24. Then they kind of huddle up together. They said to one another, truly we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, yet we would not listen. Therefore this distress has come upon us. Now that's a new detail. We didn't have that before. We assumed that when they threw him in a pit and when they got him out and they sold him to the Midianites, the Ishmaelites, we assumed he was hoping that they wouldn't do that. It's pleading with them not to do that. Now we're getting that. Now imagine the mercilessness of not giving into those pleas of your younger brother and just selling him off into slavery. They recognize that. And then Reuben jumps in. Did I not tell you, do not sin against the boy? You would not listen. Now comes the reckoning for his blood. And he realizes, okay, this is the way it works morally. There is a reckoning to pay. There will be in our society, there will be in our churches, there will be for many individual Christians, a reckoning to pay. All will pay that reckoning at some point. And honestly, that's kind of a terrifying thing to think about. They're experiencing that right now. They recognize that they're experiencing some of that payback, that reckoning for what they're doing. Now, talking about spying, verse 23, they did not know, however, that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between them. So they come in, and Joseph is going to use this interpreter. They don't know that he knows what they're saying. They don't know that he knows their language. They don't even know that they're related. But he's going to spy in on what they're hearing. This is part of his experiment to test their faithfulness. He's going to listen in and see what they're saying. They think they're being caught. By the way, I like those first few words of verse 23. They did not know. They don't have a clue what's going on here. And I would just suggest, when you and I are going through things like this, and we think, I need to know what's happening, I need to know what's going on, most of the time we don't have a clue what's happening. And the prerogative to know is God's. It's not ours. Our duty is to be faithful, to trust and obey, and trust that God knows what he's doing. Not, why did this happen? What about the time frame? Why did God allow this to happen? Why did this injustice, unfairness happen to me? You know what? I know we all always ask those questions. I know we've talked about this many times. If you get some answers to those, great. But just admit, we usually don't have a clue what's going on. That's okay. That's up to God. Have the humility to know that often it's God's prerogative to know, it's ours to trust and obey. The emotions are so raw, verse 24, he turned away from them to weep, which if I can get through this without doing that myself, that would be great, but I don't know, we'll see how the chapter goes. It's very moving. He has to turn away, and he weeps. And he goes into another room or whatnot. But when he returned, he spoke to them, he took Simeon from them, and bound them before their eyes, and he escorts Simeon to prison. Now I'm going to go through the rest of this chapter very quickly. He's left behind. The brothers get their food, and they travel. They want to get out of there as quickly as possible. They travel away. They stop somewhere overnight. They open their bags to get a little bit of grain to feed the animals, and guess what's there? All their money. This is good, right? Not if you have a guilty conscience. And if you'll notice in verse 28, then he said, one of the brothers said to the other brothers, my money has been returned, and behold, it is even in my sack. And their hearts sank, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, what is this that God has done to us? When you have a guilty conscience, even the blessings of God seem like a death penalty. Seem very horrifying. They don't know what's happening. And again, they don't have to. Summarizing the rest of the chapter, they tell Jacob about their need to bring Benjamin with them next time they return. Jacob does not respond well. Verse 36, their father Jacob said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And you would take Benjamin? All these things are against me. Jacob is not digging this idea, this plot. And this is now the tension. Well, let's see how long we can last. Can we last out this famine? They might not know. Maybe they didn't read the paper. I don't know. Maybe they don't know that it's going to be 7 years. Can we last this thing out? Or is Jacob going to have to let go of Benjamin and allow his sons to steward him as they take him down to Egypt? Getting into chapters 43 and 44, we're going to see a sibling stratagem. And there's really two parts to this, and these are the issues. How can Joseph teach his brothers a valuable lesson? That's one. But the other problem is, how can the brothers safely steward their sibling Benjamin? You'd think this would go easily. The reality is very little in life is easy, and they're going to have a bit of a hard time with this. Let me read chapter 43, verses 1 through 3. Now the famine was severe in the land, so it came about when they had finished eating the grain which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, go back, buy us a little food, okay? He's a little bit different attitude this time. A little less snark, a little less, what about the staring contest? A little more, hey, why don't you guys head down and get us some more food? Judah stands up and he says, Judah spoke to him, however, saying, this man solemnly warned us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy food. Now, again, this is the tension. They're going to have this fight for a while. By the way, they have this fight for a while. Drop down to verse 10. Judah is going to say, listen, we get from the text that this was just like an afternoon discussion that they had. This apparently goes on for a long time. He says in verse 10, if we had not been arguing about this, if you had not delayed, we could have gone down there and back. We could have made that trip twice. Now, he might be a little snarky himself, a little hyperbolic, but if you think that's maybe several weeks of a trip or a month-long trip, that's 4 months has gone by. That they've been arguing about this, getting thinner and thinner, starving, and finally they convince him to let them take Benjamin down. But the way they convince him is what Judah stands up and says in verses 8 and 9. Now, again, I want to remind you of that chapter we kind of skipped, because it's pretty close. It's somewhere between PG-13 and R. I'll let you read it on your own. Chapter 38, some of Judah's indiscretions. But now Judah stands up and very responsibly says in verses 8 and 9, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die. Throwing Jacob's words back in, hey, now before it was up to us to live and die, now it's up to you if we're going to live and die. We as well as you and our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible for him if I do not bring him back to you and set him before you. Then let me bear the blame for you forever. Again, after a whole chapter of Judah's indiscretions, we're very grateful. Remember, this is the Messianic tribe. Yeah. Not super excited about the Messianic tribe. We're not really excited about Judah right now. The Davidic tribe, the Messianic tribe. Judah agrees responsibly here to steward Benjamin. And I think we're going to see in this story a lot of sibling maturity. Let's review real quickly how well I know we did this a couple weeks ago, but let's just review how well have sibling relationships gone in the book of Genesis. No bueno, or to use our Hebrew, no tov, no tov. These have been not good relationships. Isaac and Jacob, a little rocky at best. Some resolution toward the end. Isaac and Ishmael, a little less so perhaps. Not the same resolution. Let's go all the way back to the first sibling relationship in human history.
Cain and Abel.
Ends with a fratricide. so right now we're thinking, boy, siblings not going well in Genesis. In fact, I think what the author is trying to do is specifically make a contrast for us. God comes to Cain and says, "Where's your brother?" Now God knows. In fact, he says he knows because he says, "Oh, that's your excuse? Actually, your brother's blood that you spilled is crying out at me from the ground." I'm not a dummy. I'm just asking a rhetorical question here. See how you respond. Famously, Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" It seems to me that Judah is answering that question here at the end of Genesis that was asked at the beginning of Genesis. And the answer is, absolutely, you are your brother's keeper. And I think this is great with what Larry was reading for us earlier, because there's an application for spiritual siblings as well. I'll just read Colossians 3:13 again. Bearing one another, forgiving one another, whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you. So I think at this point we can broaden this out theologically to recognize we're not just talking about these siblings back then, we're talking about spiritual siblings today as well. They convince him. I'm going to fast forward a little bit really through most of the rest of this chapter. They take Benjamin and they take the goods, they take more money, they go back down to Egypt. When they get there, verse 16, when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, and maybe he's going to encounter Benjamin, so maybe see them coming from afar. He said to his house steward, "Bring the men to my house, slay an animal, make it ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon." Okay, great. So he prepares a banquet for them. He invites them over to his house, which must have seemed really weird. Now remember, they're nervous about the old spiritual karma coming back and haunting them, the reckoning that we don't believe in karma, but you know what I mean, this coming back to haunt them. So they're a little nervous about this. They didn't get a great reception from this guy last time. Now they're getting a reception, and they're a little concerned about this. They come to his house and actually talk to his housekeeper. Verse 19, so they came near to Joseph's house steward and spoke to him at the entrance of the house. They're trying to cut off a potential concern. They said in verse 20, "Oh my Lord, indeed we came down the first time to buy food. When we came to the lodging place, we opened our sacks. Each man's money was in the mouth of a sack, our money in full. So we have brought it back in our hand." He says, "Okay, if you're gonna tell us that we did this, we know we did it. We're bringing it back, and we're gonna pay for even more for the grain. We got some valuables. Whatever we could do. We don't want you to think the wrong thing about us." So he says in verse 22, "We also brought down other money in our hand to buy food. We do not know who put the money in our sacks." And in verse 23, he says, "Be at ease, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them. By the way, did you catch? Simeon's been sitting there in an Egyptian jail for a half a year, or 4 months, or 3 months. He hasn't even been with them. He's been sitting in the jail for all this time. And suddenly he reemerges. He's probably all kind of like Joseph was. They shave him up and get him all pretty, and here he is, Simeon. They see Simeon again, who's been, I'm sure he says, "So where have you guys been? Are you kidding me? I mean, we got an email, a text from you guys, but where have you been? I've been sitting here for 4 months." Probably happy to see them. I have some poignant questions for them as well. We continue to go through the story. They bow down again before Joseph when they see Joseph. Verse 26, when Joseph came home, they brought into the house They brought into the house to him the present which was in their hand and bowed down to the ground before him. Again, they bowed down before him. Verse 29, he lifted his eyes and he saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. He said, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "May God be gracious to you, my son." Joseph hurried out, for he was deeply stirred over his brother, and he sought a place to weep, and he entered his chamber and he wept there. The deep emotions that Joseph feels when he sees Benjamin. He gives Benjamin an extra amount of the food in the banquet, and he really treats Benjamin. And you know what? It seems like things are going well for everybody. This is a really nice story. This would be a great time for Joseph to reveal himself to the boys, and then we'll just be done, and then we'll end Genesis, and we'll move on to another book, and this will be great. One more test in verse 44. One more ploy that will consume most of chapter 44. Joseph instructs his steward again to give the brothers their grain and to give them their money back. So chapter 44, verse 1 and 2, he commanded to his house steward, saying, "Fill the men's sacks with food as much as they can carry," and they put each man's money in the mouth of the sack. And then he says, "Put my cup, this silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and the money for the grain." And he did as Joseph told him. Okay, so they're finally getting out of here. They're heading for okay, we got Benjamin, we got Simeon back, we got grain, we're good to go. Let's get out of here. And they start heading out. After a little while, verse 4, just as they had gone out of the city, they were not far off. Joseph sent his house steward, "Follow the men. When you overtake them, say, 'Why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the one from which my Lord drinks, which he indeed uses for divination? You have done wrong in doing this.'" So they overtook him and spoke these words to him. So again, I think you know the story pretty well. They leave, they're apprehended, they're accused of stealing Joseph's divination cup. And this cup is probably not valued just for its material property, but as a divination cup, they would presume it has some unique magical power. So to steal this would be, stealing something you could never get back. You go buy another cup. But there's something uniquely magical was the idea about this. Of course, that's not true. Joseph knows that. This is just part of the ploy to continue to test the brothers here at this point. I love this. This is funny. He says they say in verse 8, "The money which we found in the mouth of our sacks, we brought back from you from Canaan. How could we steal that?" I said, "Are you kidding me? That after everything we've been through, you think we're going to steal something from you as well? I mean, you've got to be joking." And they make a very bold statement. They make a pronunciation, a judgment. Verse 9, "With whomever of your servants it is found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves." They know, they have confidence that none of them took it after all of this. None of them would have done this. It's ridiculous. And the steward says, "Okay, you said so. Now let it be according to your word." Okay, you pronounce the judgment. Whoever is the guilty person will be enslaved. That's great. So they hurried, verse 11. Each man lowered his sack to the ground, and each man opened his sack. He started with the oldest. Okay, work backward. Look at first two, no, nothing. The next one, third, fourth, they work all the way down. And now we get to Benjamin. Well, Benjamin isn't going to steal. Are you kidding me? He's a nice kid. He's not going to steal this. They searched, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. They tore their clothes, and when each man loaded his donkey, they returned to the city. The cup is in Benjamin's bag. I imagine, by the way, don't you imagine that as Joseph had done, he is pleading his innocence, and they are not believing it? He's pleading with them to be merciful, to be kind, to listen to his story, and they are not believing it. They're just, "Are you kidding me? We brought this kid down," and insisting on the injustice of these accusations. The brothers are so distraught they tear their clothes. From their perspective, there is no way this ends well. That's kind of interesting in itself. I mean, they're thinking, okay, we lose Benjamin, we all get enslaved, we don't get the food back to our kids and relatives. There is no way this ends well. And I don't know if you've ever been in one of those situations that was that dire. And here again, this is the benefit of not knowing everything, is not knowing that everything that happens that seems like there's no good thing that can happen from it. With God, there's still something good that can happen from it. We don't know all the details enough to look at a situation and say, "There's no way this ends well." Because with God, it's going to end well. It might not be pretty, it might not be fun. We're not guaranteed that. But we are guaranteed that, if not entirely in this life, certainly in the next life, it will end well with those who trust in God. In this horrifying moment, they did not know that they were enduring an elaborate plan and lesson. They were never in this whole situation in any real danger. Which, that's kind of funny to think that no matter what we go through, we're never really in any real danger. Oh yeah, there's a medical thing, or there's a persecution. Things may hurt and be unpleasant. We're not really in any real danger when we know that God has our souls, has our lives in his hands. How much more are we aware of, how much more are we always in God's completely loving, though sometimes inscrutable plans and intentions? We are never far away from what God has planned for us. A couple more, if you'll just allow me to finish the chapter here, or get a couple more verses here. And by the way, I would also say this: be careful of the dire conclusions that we sometimes draw from the limited data we have.
Right.
Oh, this is the word. Be careful. Not with God. We have limited data. Let's just trust in God. They face Joseph again, and guess what they do? They bow down to him again. Now, I've lost count. This is the third or fourth time, and Joseph has got to be. There's got to be something very sweet and wonderful, but also some vindication for Joseph. And he says that he says in verse 15, "Hey, you took my divination cup." The practice of divination. Technically, dream interpretation is a subcategory of divination. So he's not entirely lying to him when he talks about understanding the will of God from different methodologies, essentially. Judah asks an important. Judah steps up, and again, we say, "Way to go, Judah!" Judah's turned out to be a pretty good guy in all of this. He steps up, and we get a glimpse of man's bigger problem when he stands before Joseph. We get a glimpse of humanity standing before God. As he says, "What can we say to my Lord? What can we do? What can we say? What can we say to justify ourselves?" He says in verse 16, "And how can we justify ourselves?" This is the word tzedakah, which means to be just, or to be righteous, or to be justified, or to be vindicated. This is the Old Testament equivalent of our New Testament word dikaiao, which means to be justified. Again, he sounds very Pauline as he's saying this. They didn't do anything wrong in this particular instance. The point is that people still need vindication. We still need justification. And guess what? This is a beautiful thing. I don't want to ruin the ending. We're right in the beginning of the story. I don't want to ruin the ending. But that question, you probably know, that question is going to be answered in this book. How do we justify ourselves? Well, the first part of the answer is you don't. You can't. Even in a world where everybody thinks they can solve all their problems with technology and medicine and philosophy and economics, that's slowing down the problem. It's not solving it. We can't justify ourselves. We need a Savior, the God-man, Jesus Christ. He alone will provide the justification that we need. I'm going to stop there, pick it up from here. This story just gets so moving and so beautiful as we go on. A couple quick things, just to kind of return to what we talked about at the beginning. Emotions are an important part of our lives. It's okay to know that as God puts us through some of the things that we go through in life, or others put us through these things, to just enjoy the emotions that God provides, and just to know that those are part of who we are. Also, just to remember that, we're all tested by someone, if not directly by God, sometimes through someone that God sends into our lives, just as these gentlemen were tested. And also to remember how important it is. We can't earn justification. To answer his question, there's no way we can justify ourselves. We need a deliverer, as Joseph is going to be a deliverer for them on a very specific way. So also Christ has provided deliverance for us through his death and resurrection for our sins. And we can be grateful eternally for that. And that has made us now part of God's family and part of a family with one another as well. Family does matter. Let's close this morning with